Thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Harvey. Jeremy and Harvey, thank you for your opening remarks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Travis Parker. I'm a program area director with Policy Research Associates based out of Delmar, New York. And it's an honor to be moderating this panel this morning with actually two panels of very distinguished speakers and a follow-up speaker who will be talking about correct crisis intervention today. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about myself, so we can get started with these panels. Our first panelist group is going to be out of Westchester County, and we'll be hearing from Michael Orth, the Commissioner of the Westchester County Department of Community Mental Health, Mark Giuliano, the Program Director of Community Support at Westchester County, Jennifer Lacker, the Deputy Commissioner of Special Initiatives with the Mount Vernon Police Department, and Janice Griffith, the White Plains Greenburgh from the White Plains Greenburgh NAACP chapter. What I would recommend, I normally would not recommend this to you when we're going to be listening to a panel, but because at least on my screen we have so many people on there, you might switch over to speaker view on the top of your screen. So that way, as our individual panelists are speaking, you can see them up closer and know who is speaking on your screen. Without further ado, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being part of this important forum. I do want to acknowledge NYAPRS, Harvey, Jeremy, and all of you part of this panel. Responding to people in distress, an exploration of the roles of mental health workers, police, and racism. We all know this is an important topic, and we probably need a few days to fully address and explore, so we're just going to scratch the surface. As Travis said, my name is Michael Orth, and I have the privilege of serving as Commissioner of the Department of Community Mental Health. I know Jeremy has a slideshow that we put together, just a few slides to give a sense of an overview. And in our role at the Department of Community Mental Health, related to today's topic, we have responsibility for the mental health, substance misuse, and developmental disability system. And there you see the three panel presenters that I'll be sharing with this morning. And as it relates to this topic, Jeremy, if you can move on to the next slide. Jeremy, can you move it one more? There you go. It gives you a little overview of some of the work we're doing, but I want to talk more about how it's imperative that we recognize and address issues of institutional and structural racism, which has led to disproportionality really in all the systems for people of color, and which has also led to disparity. If you move on to the next slide, so one of the things that we want to talk about, that I want to talk about for my framework, is how through institutional structural racism, we've seen these disproportionate outcomes when you look at health and mental health care, which includes prenatal, life expectancy, diagnosis, racially, culturally competent care. When you look at our education system, access, the rates of special education, suspension, graduation rates. When we look at social services and how child protective reports are decided, the foster care placement rates, and obviously that holds true for law enforcement, arrests, incidents, courts, corrections, and housing. We are all responsible as systems to address these issues of disproportionality. And in Westchester, we've really looked at it from an undoing racism lens. So what I wanted to share, in 2007, many of our system stakeholders embarked on the Undoing Racism training through the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And just briefly, as all of our presenters talk today, really looking at, these are some of the key tenets that I think all of our systems really need to look at. Undoing racism, being aware of the historical impact of decisions, political decisions, how we allocate resources within systems, learning from history, training and awareness within our workforce, and also looking at shared accountability. Not only accountability to our funding streams, but also accountability to those we serve and how we allocate resources. Another important aspect of undoing racism is the power analysis. Really looking at who has decision-making, and then also gatekeepers. As police officers, as mental health people, as social services representatives, we all serve as a gatekeeper, who we allow in, how decisions are made, and without the context of understanding institutional structural racism, I think we're truly missing an important part of the work that we're doing. Jeremy, if you can move on to the next page. Next slide. These are some of the areas of focus that I really hope that we look at. It's not just about throwing more services and programs at people, especially if those services are not racially and culturally competent, and really just continue to support disparities and equity. We're also going to talk about in this presentation a lot about best practice models, how we work as a mental health system with police, a kind of a co-response initiative. What is the data showing us in terms of outcomes? So as we move forward, I'm going to ask our three panelists to each present for about 5 minutes on some overarching highlights of the work they're doing, but we did want to allow for some question and dialogue as well, because this is a topic that, as Jeremy said, offers many different possibilities, experiences, and we know as a mental health system that we have a long way to go to really understand the racial competence within our system of care and how to achieve better outcomes. So I'm going to ask Mark, who's really going to talk more about the cross-systems collaboration as it relates to police and some of the things we're doing in terms of a co-response, but also some of the challenges and potential opportunities that lies ahead of us. Mark?
There we go. So let's move on to the next slide and we can begin to delve into this. Now, when I've had the opportunity to go across New York State with Don Kamen through the Institute for Police Mental Health Community Collaboration, we often start out to talk about CIT development or crisis intervention team development by talking about the fact that when law enforcement comes in contact with people with mental health concerns, they're usually positive outcomes. The three instances that you see up here, one was in New York let's go back up there a second ago. One was out in New York City, and these two happened in Westchester County, one in Yonkers, on the border of Yonkers and Tuckahoe. The other happened in the city of White Plains. And these are truly exceptional incidents in that they make the news, in which it was a positive outcome which has made the news. We can also cite many instances in which there have been negative outcomes that make the news. But the vast majority of the incidents in which law enforcement interact with people with mental health concerns or people with lived experience, it doesn't make the news. It's not that significant that it's something that's newsworthy. In fact, many times it's unfortunate that it is. Let's move to the next slide. So we know that in each of the communities that are represented here and in our own, we've had some adverse incidents and tragic outcomes. And we also recognize that there are people with mental health concerns that end up incarcerated more often than the general population, or then, I shouldn't say the general population, but then at a disproportionate rate to the prevalence of people with mental health concerns in the community. So we want to try and take a look at how we might be able to address some of those things. And the other thing that we know is that those adverse incidents, time and time again, tend to end up with people who happen to be people of color, whether it be those adverse incidents or the disproportionate incarceration. So as Michael was speaking about just a moment ago, we have to begin to take a look at all of our systems, because there are many of our systems that end up drawing people with mental health concerns who happen to be people of color into contact with law enforcement for a whole variety of reasons. Let's move to the next slide. I'm trying to move too quickly. All right, so we want to look to transform our crisis response system. And if it turns out that we have law enforcement that have to respond, they have to be a trained set of hands. So when we look at transforming our crisis response system, one of the first things we have to take a look at, if we want to look at some of the racial disparity when we've got people of color coming in contact with law enforcement, we also have to take a look in the mirror and take a look at our own system and see how welcoming we are to provide intervention for people who are people of color. We have to take a look at who we are as service providers and take a look at the fact that I'm a white guy talking to you guys about racial disparity right off the bat, and acknowledge that. and take a look at the vast majority of the people who are part of the American Psychiatric Association, part of the American Psychological Association, and see that the vast majority of people who are practitioners within our field are not people of color. So many times, it's not simply that law enforcement are targeting people of color, but our system isn't necessarily as welcoming, and for a whole variety of reasons, to people of color. And when we are welcoming, we don't make it all that easy to access the resources. So we want to try to transform that crisis response system, and we want to try to make sure that if it turns out that law enforcement has to come out, as Jeremy said early, many times they're not coming out and treating the situation with a situation of compassion. We want officers to be able to identify people who might be struggling with crisis, so they can use a different set of skills on their tool belt, a different set of tools on their tool belt, in order to try to de-escalate that person and use compassion and use empathy to engage the person. But once they do, we also have to remember that we as a service system have to be there to accept the referral and welcome that person into our services. Move to the next slide. So we've got some common goals with our criminal justice partners, with our partners within law enforcement. They want to increase community safety, and so do we. We want to make sure that people who are in crisis are safe. We also want to promote recovery for people with mental health concerns and co-occurring disorders. Believe it or not, they would like that as well. When you've got somebody who the law enforcement have had to go out to de-escalate, once they've de-escalated them, they want the person on a track to recovery. They want supportive services in place, so even if it's just for their own self-interest, that they don't have to come out and de-escalate the person again. Let's move to the next slide. So we do have common goals. And if I were to look at our community, we could take a look at the sequential intercept model as opportunities to divert people from the justice system. And Steve Micho, who's here on the call, I believe actually coined the phrase intercept zero, looking at those services that might be in place in order to divert people before they come in contact with law enforcement, before that 911 call is made. What other services can be put in place? And in our community, we do have some services: our homeless outreach community placement team, our Yonkers triage team, the St. Vincent's crisis prevention response team. But once again, I have to question not necessarily the competence of the providers or the quality of the providers, but I think that we should take a look and reflect upon whether we're open and able to and willing to embrace people, communities of color, in providing services to get them to divert people before we've even gotten to Intercept 1. Within Intercept 1, we do have CIT and our police mental health outreach and mobile assessment program. We have the People USA Crisis Stabilization Team, and then something we're not going to talk about today, which is our Ricky data match. It's a fingerprint system. We recognize that sometimes people with mental health concerns do get arrested, and when they get that appearance ticket, we want to intervene at the quickest possible level. So we've set up a system where where we get a notification, so we can intervene and get people connected with services. Move to the next slide. All right, so the crisis intervention team, it is truly a partnership. One of the things that comes out time and time again is that people often think that CIT is a training program for law enforcement to get them to be more compassionate and get them to be more empathetic and understand the services, but it's a partnership between all of the people that are up on the board. That means that it's you and me. We're part of the solution within this as well. So when I deliver a CIT training at the local police training academy, I'm also dependent on every person in this room to be a partner in supporting people once that person is de-escalated and we've recognized that they're a person who needs support and needs services. We want people with lived experience. We want peers. We want advocates. We want the mental health provider community. We want DSS. We want everyone to be in a partnership to support that person as they move towards a recovery. Move to the next slide. So we do have some common goals, once again, to increase safety, but also to enhance police skills and respond to people in crisis. We want them to be able to discern who is that person who's in a state of crisis. and be able to look at the variables so that they can make an educated assessment, so that they know what tools to use. You and I know that and recognize that a lot of policing is based on or predicated on intimidation. There's a lot of lights, a lot of noise, a lot of movement. Things go very quickly, and the police go home safely at the end of the day. That doesn't necessarily work that way for everyone in the community. When you've got someone who's living in a state of perpetual fear, when you bring the police tactic of intimidation to the table, what it's going to do is escalate the situation, and that's when people get hurt. That's when people with mental health concerns and co-occurring disorders get hurt. That's when officers get injured, and we want to be able to help them identify those people who might be in a state of crisis so they can use the other tools on the tool belt so that they can link them to us within the community. We should have a selection of officers. This should be for experienced officers. One of the things that we've done in Westchester is we've begun to train all of our police recruits because we figure that more training is better. But that doesn't necessarily make them a CIT officer. What it means is that they're a new recruit who has additional training on how to work with people who might be in a state of crisis. And once again, it has right in the bullet here, we have to have a responsive mental health system. So that means that we have a responsibility in this as well. One of the things that I've found in all the time that I've been doing this, and it's been over 20 years now, working specifically with law enforcement, is that we in the mental health community often work on a different schedule than first responder time. With first responder time, things need to happen immediately. We will operate by, well, we'll get to it. We'll give you an appointment. We'll give you an appointment in an area that you might not be able to get to because of the disparities in access to healthcare and mental health care. And we have people who continuously go back into a state of crisis. And we should always be taking a look to see if we can make our programs better. Let's move to the next slide. Our co-response initiatives. In the city of White Plains, the city of Yonkers, and the city of New Rochelle, we actually have a social worker or a clinician embedded in each of those police departments. Sometimes they respond to the crisis, and sometimes they're doing the casework follow-up. So it's not necessarily that every time you call for somebody, when someone's in a state of crisis for a clinician, that you're going to get a law enforcement response. You may always get a law enforcement. You may always end up with a law enforcement response, but that clinician may or may not be there. Sometimes we're doing the casework follow-up within the community policing division. We've been running these programs in White Plains, started in 2005, in Yonkers, started in 2008, and only 2 years ago we began in the city of New Rochelle. In the beginning of the COVID health crisis, we began a virtual assessment program where we assigned either someone from the People USA Crisis Stabilization Team, someone from our office, or someone from the St. Vincent's Crisis Prevention Response Team to act as a resource for every one of the police departments in Westchester County, so that if it turned out that they had somebody who they thought was in a state of crisis and we could get them connected with services as opposed to going to the emergency room, we thought that might be a safer alternative rather than the person being traumatized and taken to the emergency room and then being exposed to COVID and having law enforcement professionals exposed to COVID, because in the beginning of this, we were really our hospitals in Westchester were really embedded with people within the COVID health crisis. All right, so let's move to the next. So what we're looking at this point are a couple of different models. We've been in contact with Broome County. We love what they're doing with their 911 diversion program. They've been really successful. We recognize that we don't need to always send police, fire, or an ambulance out to a call that involves a person who's in a state of mental health crisis. And so we want to be able to replicate what's going on there, because they do seem to have a very, a really skillful program that helps people get connected with services. So this happens, when this happens, we want to make sure that when there is a mental health crisis, that the person who's responding has a mental health background. And then the other program that we're looking at, let's move forward to the next slide, is what's going on right over in Rockland County, which is the Behavioral Health Response Team, which we've seen in New York City within their co-response model. In the Oregon model, it's known as CAHOOTS, which is a name that I absolutely hate, but that's here or there. It's pairing together a mental health practitioner along with EMS personnel to provide support to that person within the community. So as I said in the very beginning, when we take a look at what we've been doing within our community, and many of you have been doing it within your communities because Don and I have been going around from place to place, providing system mapping in preparation for CIT, and we know your crisis response models. And there's some really fantastic work that's being done across the state. And whenever we have an opportunity to improve it and do a little bit better, we want to grab those opportunities. And these seem like a couple of really promising practices that we would like to bring into our community. I believe that finishes off the slides for me, but let's jump to the next slide. All right, so you can just skip this. That's exactly what we just talked about.
So thank you, Mark, for that. Our next partner is someone that we've had the privilege of working with more recently, Jennifer Lackard, who's a Deputy Police Commissioner of the Mount Vernon community. So Deputy Commissioner Lackard.
Hi, thank you. I would like to thank you for having me today. I feel privileged to be able to speak to this group about what we are doing here at the Mount Vernon Police Department. I think some of the work that we're doing can be labeled inside of the realm of police reform, but it is not anything that's new to me. I have been doing this work for some time, and shortly after being inaugurated, I started making phone calls trying to figure out how I can enhance the role of Mount Vernon given our dynamics here, being a predominantly African-American community. We have a lot of challenges around mental health and addiction that we need to really figure out what the solution is and what does that look like. And so I came in with a few criteria, or at least priorities, that I wanted to deal with. One was to increase the number of CIT trained officers that we have here at the police department. Also, I wanted to increase the ability of members of service to identify an issue so that they know when there is something, like how to identify someone having a behavioral health crisis, whether it's mental health, substance abuse, or even a developmental disability. What are the difference between the three? We do have some officers who are maybe familiar personally, some maybe who have been crisis intervention trained, or some may have just been on the force long enough, they've seen enough of it, so now they know. I am committed to making sure that the officers here can actually identify when someone is actually going through a crisis, and not just identifying it, but knowing at that time who to call and why. And I think that's the problem and the struggle that we have. So most likely when I was a provider back many days, I ran a treatment facility. And when we created these crisis plans for our clients, we created the crisis plans, and the first thing was to call 911. And I always had a problem with that, just sort of as an administrator. Why is it that we call 911 first? And I think there's this expectation that law enforcement knows what to do, or that they can come and that they can actually protect or actually create some kind of resolution in the moment. But I think that gets into murky waters, because if you have an officer who responds who is not trained or is not familiar with what they are seeing, you have no idea what that result can be. And so I, from a provider standpoint, 15 years ago, thought I didn't feel comfortable with the way that looked. But now, and also going through training and training officers for years in crisis intervention training, I've seen the benefit of an officer understanding what that means, but then also feeling comfortable in knowing the network that is available to them. And very similar to what Mark just previously presented on a crisis intervention program. It's not just a training about how officers can respond, but it's a full comprehensive model that allows officers to get to know who the providers are, meet them, spend time, see what the providers present to them about what it is that they do. So in real time, an officer knows, okay, this person is actually de-escalating. They're not a danger to themselves or others. However, they actually do need some calm space. Where do I send them? What provider in the community has that? Not only that, what provider is available right now? And so the other part of one of my priorities here at the police department is within the city of Mount Vernon. how can we create that network that is available, not just from 9 to 5, which is typical, but what happens from 5 p.m. to 9 a.m. when we do see a large number of escalations happening in the community? Where do we send people, and how do people know where to go? And I think that's another issue that we don't really pay attention to, which is unique coming from the perspective of a police department, and that is something that I am vested in creating that roadmap. And so let's talk about roadmaps. There are these wellness roadmaps that I am creating here in the Mount Vernon Police Department. They are also circled around mental illness, really behavioral health, because it does also make the cross section between addiction as well as developmental disabilities. Again, all three of those can be occurring at the same time. And so one has to, while an officer does not have to be a licensed credentialed or a clinician, they should be able to sort of understand what's happening, or say, I don't know what to do, I might need help, and this is the agency that I call. And because they're officers and they're not trained for this kind of stuff, I'm also doing here is creating a co-response network, so that in real time, when there is a call that comes in, and that is identified through a special needs registry that we're creating, we're calling them, for the lack of a better word, the individuals who are like our top 20 or top 25s, our frequent flyers, those that we know we get calls on often, that we know have developmental disabilities, or we know have some type of mental illness, and maybe it has some co-occurrence with addiction. When we know that, and we know what's going on with them, we've created that list. Many of our officers, if you say someone's name, they know the name, they recognize the name. They see the face, they know them. Oh, that's so-and-so from over here. They know that. And so what I'm doing is taking that collective information, that institutional knowledge that we have here, and saying, let's compile in a comprehensive, HIPAA compliant way. How can we compile these records, this data, for individuals who we know are challenged, who are having problems? When they're having a problem, who are the providers that they're associated with? Are they connected to an agency? Does that agency have a first responder service? Do they have a peer network where we can call someone when that happens? There have been instances when we dealt with someone who was in a crisis, and then shortly after did not have a crisis, and that was through our community policing work that we've started to do, where officers have now had positive contact with our residents after a crisis in the community, and then reaching out to them to say, hey, listen, so now you're stable and networked, what would you have done differently? When that's happening and we're called to the scene, how would you like for us to respond? And I know this from being and not a direct provider, an administrator of a clinical agency. In that moment, when someone is decompensating, they can't tell you what they need. But if you circle back to them when they're doing better, or maybe shortly after they've come out of treatment, or they've been inpatient and now come back into the community, they've had time to think about it, or you've even talked to their other support networks, they can lead you a roadmap exactly what this person needs when they're in that moment. It could be approaching the person directly sets them off, and they'll attack you, or they'll perceive it differently. Maybe asking a question, or not immediately going for your handcuffs. Those are things that we've seen, that when we've had those conversations, we've been able to de-escalate the situation so that we can get it, so the person can get the help that they need. Obviously, we're law enforcement, so we're the ones that people call. That does not necessarily mean that every officer that responds is going to be prepared for whatever they're seeing at that time. But my commitment here, and it's been my work over the last couple of months, to find out what officers are trained, what officers need to be trained on their role based on their sector, based on what they're doing, that they should be trained. I would love to get everyone here at the department trained, working with the county on their CIT training. While they do the training inside of the academy, they've also made themselves available to train our officers here on site, which is a tremendous training, because I know that that's a lot of time and it's a huge commitment. However, we're struggling with how many hours we can get officers off the beat and actually into training. So being able to come on site and do those trainings is sort of a commitment that I would like to have all of my officers trained by the end of next year. But with that said, what does that mean? What does that actually mean for someone who is now struggling? They've come in contact with an officer, and we now have this wellness roadmap that we're working out. Well, what that means is by creating these registries or information in our database so that we know when we get a call. Again, our dispatchers know a lot. If we know the name or we know what's going on, most likely there's a history and they know that. Getting them trained to know when you hear someone or someone's having an emotional breakdown, what do you do? What officers are on call, right? So the next thing is taking a look to see what officers are CIT trained. And let's make an intentional effort to actually dispatch those officers to the scene. On top of that, I then get notified on certain individuals who are on our top 25 list. If there's an incident, I get a call about that. And then we also are now creating these co-response networks so that providers in the community are responding with us as well. Not just responders who are first responders or clinicians, but I'm talking about individuals who can send them or take them somewhere, who can help maybe do some services with them in real time, whether it's 7 o'clock in the evening or it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Where could someone go? What's available? Working with DSS resources, working with community resources available at that hour. When people have a crisis, they have a crisis. It's not something that can wait until later when 9 a.m. and everyone opens up for business. I'm very sensitive to that, and I have been trying to train and really educate members of service here in the department that this is what we do. So while officers are really trained and they know very well how to protect, I think my goal and what I'm trying to do here is to really teach them how to serve. And I think there's a difference between that. And that depends on what community you live in, what dynamics are present in that community. And here in Mount Vernon, we do have a high prevalence of behavioral health issues. So for me, my commitment is to really get us on speed, whether it's police reform or not. This is something that needs to be a part of the DNA of this department. It needs to be a part of the DNA of every police department. You'll hear later on there are other police departments who are doing really good work in this space. Same thing, not that we are, coming up with this and it's rocket science. It just is a model to really show other departments that you have to continue to have this ongoing dialogue about what you're doing in your community. What does it look like? What does it smell like? And how can we improve that? As new drugs hit the street, and then they're more of an issue. For people, we have a lot of individuals who have mental illness and they do not use their prescribed medication, but they may use street drugs, where the contraindications for that is even worse. And so how do we work with that? Because then when our officers are transporting them to the hospital because they are clearly a danger to themselves or potentially others, then that most likely is something where they're likely for an inpatient stay. The problem is, if there is some other street use or there's K2 or something else going on there, really the hospital and the psychiatric ward is at a loss because they're trying to figure out what is presenting at that moment. So the more that we can get background information on the individuals in our community who we know are struggling would be helpful. The more that we can find out how to properly support them in crisis would be even more helpful. And then the more that we're able to have partnerships that can respond and give us those services that we need so that in real time we can show up for the community the way they need is really the direction that we're going. So I'm going to stop there. I could talk for days, but I'm going to stop there and leave it open for conversations later. But thank you, Travis, for having me, and I'm here for questions later on.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. We really appreciate it. Because of the late start, we're not going to have too much time for a dialogue. So if you can please put in your chat questions in the box, and we have had some good dialogue. I started talking in the beginning about the value of undoing racism and the lens to add related to the impact of institutional and structural racisms on all of our systems. And our final panel speaker for Westchester with us is Janice Griffith, who's the president of the White Plains Greenburgh NAACP chapter. And I know we have for about 5 or 6 minutes, Travis. So we welcome Janice to the panel.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Janice. Good to see you.
much for having me. I'm here as the White Plains Greenburgh president, but I'm also here to listen and learn, because we are doing so much work with police brutality, and when you have to add that mental health issue into it, it tends to make the work twice as hard. We are looking to take the police out of, maybe not totally, but we're looking to take the police out of mental health calls. I mean, if we could get our way, and which what we're trying to do is establish policies where mental health professionals are the ones who respond to mental health calls. And that is and that it would be their decision to decide whether it was appropriate for a police officer to be there, and if it was appropriate for them to be in uniform, and if they thought it was necessary that they might need to use some kind of physical restraints. But I'm listening here and I'm liking what I'm hearing about the 911 diversion calls. And, you know, we all agree that the officers need additional training. And that is so important. We'd like to see the officers put more humanity into their role as police officers, include humanity. These are people in crisis. They're not criminals. So I'm just going to leave it with systemic racism is all across the board. Everywhere you look, there is systemic racism in housing, in healthcare, in education, of course, in the criminal justice system. So there's no wonder there's a whole lot of mental health issues with our people. So we'd like to see more mental health professionals be involved with this, and leave the police out of it as much as possible. I know that can be costly. We're told that is costly to have 24 hours, 7 days a week mental health care providers, but we think it's worth it. And we think that there's money that can be used in that area. Take money from somewhere else that maybe it's not as necessary and put it towards mental health, because it is so important. And so many mentally health challenged people are being traumatized at the sight of a police officer, and we have all seen it, have been killed by police officers. And we're looking for ways to see how we can change that. So I'm listening, and I'm going to bring back the information that I'm getting to my local chapter. And thank you again for having me. And we have work to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Janice.
Wonderful. Janice, thank you so much. And I really want to thank our just very distinguished panel with Michael, Mark, Jennifer, and Janice. A couple of things before our Dutchess County panel gets started. So as you're noticing, hopefully if you're monitoring the chat box, there are 271 of us on here today. And so I'm going to encourage you, because I already know we simply will not have enough time to get to all the questions that people are going to want to ask. If you do have a question that you want to ask directly to a panelist that has already spoken or is getting ready to speak, please feel free to reach out to them in the chat box. And I'm going to ask our panelists, please keep an eye on the chat box. I know there's been some great dialogue going back and forth between audience members and our panelists, as well as from audience members to audience members. So please keep up that interaction as we're going here. We're now going to make the transition, and we'll try to get to a few questions at the end of today in the next hour and 5 minutes. But we're going to switch over now to our Dutchess County panel. And again, thank you to all the members of the Westchester County panel. So we're going to have Ken Roman, the Deputy Commissioner at the Dutchess County Emergency Response, Steve Micio, the CEO of People USA, and Detective Don Animelos of the Poughkeepsie Police Department. I know that there will be some slides to be shown here. And since it's easier for me because of the large number of people that are going to be working in the chat box, This panel, the Dutchess County panel, will be going until approximately 11:35 a.m. Okay, just so our folks on the Dutchess County panel. Thank you, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ken.
Good morning. How are you? I believe Steve is going to speak first, so I will let Steve do the introductions, and then I'll pick up where we agreed that I'd be presenting. So, Steve, if you don't mind jumping in.
Sure. Thanks, Ken. Yeah, just going to introduce Ken Roman and Detective Dawn Anemelis from the town of Poughkeepsie, who is also our CIT coordinator in the county of Dutchess. And I'm Steve Michio, the CEO of People USA, and just wanted to talk about the objective today is to just share the current roles, mental health and police in Dutchess County. And when I say mental health, I'm talking about addiction services as well. I'm talking about the whole gamut of behavioral health as we talk, and show how the county is addressing the future of police reform, which I think, and I'm proud to say that Dutchess County is very aggressive, and Ken will talk about that, what we're doing in Dutchess County. But then going back before all of this happened, how aggressive the county has been with the Criminal Justice Council in moving the system, the criminal justice system forward and the behavioral health system forward to a better place. And we're going to talk about the ongoing challenges. And a lot of what you're going to hear me say about that is communication. And that's a constant for everybody, I think, is if you don't communicate, if you don't integrate and really work hard as a community, that's the major challenge in all of this. And then we're going to share our plan to how we're addressing implicit bias in our communities as well, which again was something that we had started to address with our Criminal Justice Council a few years ago. This started for us. So I think it was, we've done some good work there. So as you know, the order Governor Cuomo put into place is asking and requiring local governments with police agencies to reform their systems, eliminate racial inequities, reform and modernize police procedures, strategies, tactics, submit a plan by April 1st. Our county executive jumped on this, Mark Molinaro, and people that may know him or have heard of him know that he's very progressive in behavioral health and disabilities and criminal justice in trying to do it right. And he brings a lot of us in the community on board to work in that direction. So this group started with a very aggressive amount of workshops and community forums, and Ken has been leading a big part of that. And I'm going to leave it to Ken to talk a little more about that and the slides and what we've been doing. And then we'll talk more about the services that we have now that we've been doing that are really successful. And then we'll talk a little bit about CIT and then move to the racial inequities. So I'm going to let Ken take over from here to talk about what we're doing in Dutchess County.
All right, well, thank you very much, Steve. That was a great overview of what we've been doing here in Dutchess County since the executive order came out. As you mentioned, the county executive has been very, very aggressive in our dealing with this executive order. But as you also mentioned, this is something that's been on his radar for many years. He has been very, very proactive, very progressive in trying to really include a lot of the treatment community and get a lot of the things that have been traditionally over the last 20, 30 years been falling in the hands of law enforcement, away from law enforcement and trying to provide an alternative. And I think that Dutchess County and the Criminal Justice Council has been working hand in hand with the health professionals. And I must tell you that I apologize for not even knowing that this organization existed. And now that I'm on this forum and I'm watching the camera and how many people are on this is fascinating. I cannot lie. I thought we'd maybe have 20, 30 people on. When I heard the number into the hundreds, I was shocked. I am very, very impressed. But at the same time, I'm also very comforted by that to know that there's that many people that are passionate about what you do and really care about helping the community. And I believe it was somebody from Westchester that mentioned the goals. And as I was reading those goals, I was thinking to myself, well, that's exactly what we all share. I think we all share in the same mission and getting the same thing accomplished at the end of the day. I just feel that many of us for many years have been going in the wrong direction. I've been in law enforcement myself for 37 years. I started as a very young man working in corrections, New York State correction system. And then I went into work in the police department, and I spent 32 years in the police department, retired as a patrol captain. And during the last 12 years, no, the last 9 years, excuse me, the last 9 years of that, I also had the pleasure of serving in the county legislature and working with people like Steve and other healthcare professionals and people in the behavioral health, specifically in that field, where I found that, boy, this is something that cops really have a huge, huge gap where we don't get it. And I understood that. And people like Steve and his associates and others in that field were willing to come to law enforcement and sort of bring us up to speed to at least not address some of these issues, but at the very least learn how to handle them in our capacity in law enforcement. And I think that the start of the CIT training, although I had not attended, I've been to numerous classes, and I've viewed their graduations. I've attended their graduations as a law enforcement executive and as a county legislator. But I can tell you that that is the step in the right direction. And I think we're heading in some really, really good places. And this collaborative that the executive has asked that I chair has really been working in two parallel work groups. One of the work groups is a community stakeholder group. And that work group is made up of about 28 people from throughout all of Dutchess County. It represents a multitude of backgrounds. And there's only on that entire group, I believe, 2 ex-law enforcement officers. Everyone else is either a member of the mental health professionals, the judiciary, the DA's office, the public defender. Both the public defender and the DA themselves are part of this work group. There are people from throughout the community, as far as the faith-based communities from throughout the county. We have numerous people of color. We have transgender. I really tried to make the group as diverse as possible. And I'm very, very pleased to say that we are at the point that literally tomorrow, we're looking to release the final plan that we've come up with. But also keep in mind that that plan was not only worked on by this group, but there was an administrative group that was made up of members from county government. There were about 6 of us that were working on getting the work done that the stakeholder group was putting together. And concurrently at the same time, a separate parallel group was overseeing, or not really overseeing, was reviewing all of the work that was being done. And that group was made up of a separate group was made up of mayors and supervisors from throughout Dutchess County and the police chiefs. And that group did a review of everything. They're currently still looking at some of the final products. It has been a work in progress, but I can say that hopefully by tomorrow, we will have a public release of that. Obviously, the groups have been working on it, and it's been disseminated throughout Dutchess County quite extensively to key stakeholder groups, but that's where we're at right now. In addition to the work done by those 2 groups, some of the efforts that are put forth are the creation of the Criminal Justice Subcommittee on Police Reform and Equitable Policing. I think that's a big piece. I'm gonna go off the slides, and I apologize. I was deviating quite a bit. Beginning of 2021, the helpline operations, and this is something that I've been advocating for quite some time. It is now, I've only been in this position for 2 years as deputy commissioner, but we're proud to say that we are now going to be housing the helpline here in our 911 center. As part of my responsibilities, I oversee the 911 center as well. So they're going to be moving in here. I think that is incredibly key to have the right diversion at the right times. I believe it was Deputy Commissioner Lackard that mentioned that this was something that she felt was important to her is the 911 calls and how they're fielded. I couldn't agree with her more. These are the kinds of things that early intervention, and you can't get much earlier than the phone call. As soon as the call is made, if we can divert that call to a healthcare professional, a mental health professional that can start to work on that immediately and make the determination, do we need law enforcement at that call? If we do not, then let's stay out of it. And that is something that, you know, people need to understand. Cops are tasked with being there. They're told they have to be there. They don't volunteer. They're not wanting to handle these types of calls. These are the things that, you know, most of the time they realize very quickly that, you know, what am I doing here? This is something that a counselor should be doing this. A mental health professional should be handling this. But unfortunately, they've been tasked and they've been called to do that. And that's where they're at. Another work that we've been doing is this, obviously, I already mentioned the subcommittee work from the CJC. There's a lot of behind the scenes kind of work that takes place through the CJC. The CJC has many different subcommittees that relate to mental health professionals and their intervention in the criminal justice system. And I think that is incredibly important to have alternatives, various alternatives to getting someone who may have had a mental health issue lead them to a place where they did in fact commit a crime, or they were forced to do something that might have hurt someone else unintentionally. So be it. They're still, Dutchess County is moving in the right direction and getting these people help rather than incarceration. And that's, I think, evident in our numbers that have gone down dramatically in Dutchess County. Some of the other reform efforts, the 60 college credits. It's on the slide. The slide is up on the screen. That was a big thing that's been requested by the chiefs of police for years. The group, myself, the county executive actually met with the chiefs of police and sat with them, and they insisted that we really needed to drop this down, this 60 college credit. But at the same time, we wanted to maintain the professionalism. So what we did is we decided to give the officers 5 years to get those 60 college credits. In other words, they can be hired with no college credits, but they have 5 years to get to 60. And what's not mentioned on the slide is they're going to get 30 college credits just by graduating the police academy in Dutchess County. So they're going to be halfway there just by graduating the academy. They've got 5 years to get the other 30 credits. I think that's incredibly powerful. And most large police departments in Dutchess County have tuition reimbursement. So that, some people are going to ask, how does that enlarge the diversity pool? And what we've been told is a lot of people, especially in the two cities that we have, the city of Poughkeepsie and the city of Beacon, some of the people of color struggle to afford to go to college right out of high school. So what we're finding is that some of these people would like to go, they just can't afford to go, and it's just not in the cards for them. But if we could hire them and also pay for them to go to college, that's something that I think really will seem an incentive for some of these people of color to jump in to law enforcement. And, you know, there's all kinds of efforts. This is just one of them that are being geared towards getting more people of color to obviously get involved. In addition, we're requesting or requiring, that every police officer in Dutchess County be CIT trained. And if they happen to hire someone through resignation reinstatement from another police agency, they're also given 5 years to make sure that they get the CIT training, which once again, the county executive and the Chiefs Association and both of the two work groups are very, very stressing that this needs to happen. The cops need to get this CIT training, every single cop in Dutchess County, and that's the goal. Next slide. Okay, the LEAD program, the Dutchess County District Attorney's Office has been taking this initiative, and they've been looking into it, and the county executive and both work groups are very much in favor of this. And it is LEAD stands for Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. Obviously, it is what it sounds like. It's low-level crimes, dealing with individuals and getting them out of the criminal justice system and getting them the services that they need instead of sending them to jail. And, you know, cops would be the first ones to say that, you know, when we deal with someone, this person doesn't need to go to jail. You know, this is not where they need to go. And for years, I can tell you firsthand, so many times people would come to me, unfortunately, mothers and fathers would come and say, hey, this kid, you got to get him. I'm ready to have him arrested because they just got to be off the street. They're going to kill themselves. Well, you know what? Arrest is not the answer, and arrest very often starts a really bad. It's like an avalanche of what's going to happen to this person in the future. I think it's arrest. If there is an arrest made, lead is something that can really, really help in getting them heading in the right direction to getting help, not necessarily, criminal punishment. And incarceration is not the right answer. Let's see. The next bullet, the sheriff's office evaluated every use of force policy in Dutchess County. Most of the large agencies in Dutchess County are accredited law enforcement agencies, which means that they already meet the standards of New York State and some federal accredited agencies as well. So what we did is we had the sheriff's office, because they are the largest accredited agency. They did the review of all the policies. They made recommendations to every department that needed it, and every department has been stepping up to meet those needs. Steve, next one.
Okay, I think this one.
That's for you, Steve, but thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, a lot of good questions are coming in, and I can't, I'm trying to pay attention and answer them as we go. I will say that, with the CIT, Dawn's going to talk a little bit about the outcomes of CIT and stuff and all the training that goes on. And I'm sure Don is listening, Don Kamen's listening, saying every officer in the county is going to be trained, and it's not exactly what CIT was developed to do, but it is something that the county has adopted, and they are moving forward in it. But the great thing about CIT is that it works, and it's great in our community. And it's because the officers learn about where the resources are. The bad thing about CIT is that it even exists. That means our mental health system, our behavioral health system has failed somewhere, and now we're relying on police officers as first engagers. And I don't think we should rely on that. I don't think we should rest on that and say, okay, we have a great program now with officers in our community, with judges that we're working with, all the work that we're doing in criminal justice. It doesn't speak to the system of care that I think we should be developing. And I think we're moving forward in that direction, but it's a lot of work. And it's a big paradigm to shift. And of course, as you know, it's, money is always involved, but that's the peer advocate in me speaking and saying that, I don't think we should just be satisfied that CIT is great, that police and criminal justice and alternatives to incarceration, all those things are great. I think our mental health and behavioral health system needs to evolve. And I just wanted to put that out there for something that is always on my mind, but I love what we do. And I love what the county is allowing all of us to do and partnering with us on doing this. So as you can see in our ATI in Dutchess County, we have over 600 individuals in here doing this, and in the ATI program, which is good. I mean, they get intensive treatment through the ITAP program, which is intensive treatment alternative, gets people into addiction services and things like that, and keeps them out of jail, keeps them healthy in the community so that they don't reoffend. And that's really the goal of it. My slides must have just flipped way too far ahead of me, and now I can't back them up. Anyway, I'm not going to worry about that. I do want to talk about the diversion and restorative justice programs that we have in Dutchess County, which are the Community Transition Center, where people on release can go to the Community Transition Center. Project More provides great programs and great services and great therapy and treatment for folks once they've left jail or prison. And it helps them, reacclimate to the community and get into work and get into safe places to live and things like that. They're a great organization that works with us in the county. Functional family therapy. As you know, family issues are huge. And when you don't address that, you're not going to have good outcomes. And so the functional family therapy works well. They have Teen Intervene, where they work with the younger population. So we're trying to address across the age factor, of everybody that's touched by behavioral health, criminal justice, and community services. And so that's what Dutchess County really focuses on and works hard to do. This is done, and just so you know, the community, the CJC meets every month. You know, that's important because, you know, what we realized in our jail was that we had an issue. We work with Dutchess County judicial system and educating them about what alternatives could exist for people. In the jail itself, which was really a great thing that I think started before the bail reform, was that you had a captured audience in the jail. Whether they wanted to be there or not, they were there. And so what could we do with them as a community to help them stop reoffending or to have a better start when they left the jail? And the reentry supportive transition and reintegration track, we call it Restart, was developed by a committee of peers and professionals and criminal justice folks that said, let's create a coursework in the jail that people can go to 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, to get cognitive behavioral, dialectical behavioral, peer-to-peer supports on ways of looking at themselves differently, ways of thinking differently, reducing criminogenic thinking, helping them with their addiction issues, helping them with mental health issues, and then bridging them on reentry from the jail into the community so that they continue to receive those services. And that has been extremely successful in reducing 17% of recidivism in the jail, which doesn't sound like a lot maybe, but it's a lot. It makes a big difference. And now that we went to bail reform, the captured audience has been lost. However, the outreach in the community changed because of the Criminal Justice Council rethinking this. So a lot of this is evolutionary and rethinking and retooling and trying to figure things out as life hits you. And the Criminal Justice Council does that. And they listen to all the voices on the Criminal Justice County, from the community to the police officers, to the COs, to the judges, to the county itself, and where to shift money and what to pay for, what the return on investment is going to be for the community and the county, to make it a better and healthier community. You can see that we also have the Dutchess County Stabilization Center. And I just want everyone to know that the Dutchess County Stabilization Center was originally a partnership, and it still is a partnership, with the hospital, with the Mental Health America, with the addiction services in our community, with the county itself being the umbrella agency running the service, have turned that over to People USA, which is a peer-run organization. My organization is all peer-run, and it is now a peer-run, peer-operated stabilization center. So I think it's important for folks to know that there is a heavy peer component involved in all of this, but there's also a very huge partnership involved in all the departments in the community. I understand that the sound is not working right. I don't know what to do to fix that.
We can hear you good, Steve.
You can hear me okay? So some people are saying it's blotchy. So.
Hear you just fine, Steve.
Okay, thanks. So we have the Dutchess County Stabilization Center. That is 24/7, where officers or people in the community can come 24/7, and they're greeted by a peer. There are addiction specialists in there. There are clinicians in there. The peers are in there. The recovery coaches are in there. But the important piece about the Dutchess County Stabilization Center is that you stay there 23 hours, 59 minutes at the most. And within those 24 hours, we connect you to the community service that's appropriate for you. And it's very person-centered, it's trauma-informed, it's not an emergency room. People don't wait. The reason why I designed the stabilization center is because I didn't appreciate people having to wait for anything. And then when I was working with the CIT training, I was finding out that police officers were waiting at the hospital sometimes for hours. So that means they were off the streets, waiting in a hospital with somebody to be seen before they could leave. And with the stabilization center, they no longer have to do that. People that could have been arrested on misdemeanors can come to the stabilization center if they volunteer to take that route and say, I want to go for a behavioral health assessment rather than have to go to the emergency room or even go to jail. And through the CIT training, it's been tremendous. Dawn will talk about some of the outcomes of it, on how that's been going. The mobile crisis intervention team. same thing. They work hand in hand with us at the stabilization center. We refer back and forth if needed. They get people, in the community. They also would meet officers in the community if they needed to. It is a diverse team. And then the crisis intervention team training that we have, I think is really important. So just a little more on the crisis stabilization. We know that it brings a lot of value, with the overcrowding that there was in the jails, the preventing avoidable admissions and recidivism for people going to the hospitals. It breaks the cycle of going from home to crisis to hospital, home to crisis to hospital. If you come to the stabilization center voluntarily, we're going to ensure that you're going to get to the service you need in the community. And then there's follow-up. I just want people to understand that we don't just say, hey, thanks for coming, we'll see you. We want to follow up and make sure you're getting the service that you deserve, the service that you want, and you're getting the satisfaction of the service. It does aim to achieve the triple aim for folks, which is really improved care delivery, customer satisfaction, improved population health outcomes, and reducing public costs. And it creates a welcoming gateway to the broader health and human services system in the community. Again, the nice thing about that is that officers get to know and understand, what's happening in the community, instead of referring them to the emergency room or referring them to the or going to jail. Some of the officers themselves don't even use a stabilization center. They'll go right to the provider in the community and say, I have someone here that really needs detox, or they need addiction service or outpatient or whatever. And so they can use those services. The important piece about stabilization center and the community is the integration and the partnership and the collaboration. So I do find one of the barriers, or one of the, not barriers, but one of the difficulties of doing this is the relationship of the community providers to the stabilization center. And I'm making frequent phone calls, and my staff are doing the same, to ensure that people know we're still here. We still have the expectation of a person being served in 24 hours or less. And I that's what makes it work, is that relationship. And it's a whole health approach, in case someone was wondering. It's not just about behavioral health. It's about whole health. It's about, is this person dealing with diabetes? Are they dealing with any health issues? We can connect them to an FQHC within hours, and they can go there for their full medical services that they need. So all of this lends into the 8 dimensions of wellness. It lends into whole health. It lends into diversity. And it really helps us create a community of care that actually works and is responsive. So the mobile crisis intervention team, there is the beat patrol, and Detective Dawn is going to talk a little bit about what it's like to experience the beat patrol in a minute. But it's meeting officers and community members where they are and offering a direct connection to other community services without the wait. And then there is follow-up to avoid future criminal justice engagement with that as well. And then I'm going to let Dawn talk now about the crisis intervention team training. And I know that Mark had mentioned it, and others have mentioned what's involved in crisis intervention team training. But we'll also share with you some of the data that we're collecting here in Dutchess County on how that's working, and also the personal experience that Detective Dawn has seen in the 3 years that we've been doing. No, gosh, it's been 5 years. Yeah. Oh my gosh, 5 years that we've been doing the CIT in Dutchess County. So Dawn, you want to take it?
Mm-hmm. Oh. I think you just clicked me out.
Okay, let's just turn and click as you go.
Okay. Something up there.
See?
Okay. A little bit about the beat patrol is where we send officers out. We have 2 officers travel ride around with the mental health profession for a couple hours. The way we looked at the time frames for that was the agencies that are involved in that, we pulled where their most EDP calls were, and that's where we focus on. So what we'll do is we'll drive around, we'll stop in homeless areas where there's a bigger clientele there, and we'll talk to them. The mental health person will offer them their services, show them what we're there for. We give out their business cards and just talk to people in the community. We will drive around and respond to all the EDP calls, and then we could see if we could offer more assistance there from just what the police do on their regular patrol. Oh, there we go. Our crisis intervention team, I'm the coordinator for Dutchess County. The biggest part of it, I think, is the collaboration between our community, between our mental health people and the law enforcement. So together we put on a 40-hour training for all law enforcement, our first responders. It's co-taught by either a law enforcement officer and a mental health person. At the end of the week, what we do is we have a family consumer panel. So it's people with lived experiences that come in and actually talk to the officers. I think it's great. They'll tell them some of the things that they experience with police, like whether it was good, bad, give them some like ways that maybe you could have done this better, or maybe they could have did this to calm me down, or maybe they could have offered me this, it would have been appreciated. Or they'll tell the officers what they did that was really good and helped. I think it makes a huge difference. CIT, I understand that the role is not for everybody, but in Dutchess County, we do it for everybody, all the officers. And I think the one most important thing it does is it teaches the officers some mental illness. It teaches them some substance abuse, but it lets them understand what to expect. It lets them understand, okay, so this would be a normal behavior. This is something, understand that it's gonna happen. It shows them, we'll go over some substance abuse, things to expect with that, some behaviors to expect, and it really teaches them. The main thing it teaches them is all the resources in the community. It's amazing how many resources are in Dutchess County. And I've noticed that even not in just their work life and their personal life, after they've taken the class, I've gotten so many calls from officers saying, hey, my neighbor's son's having some substance abuse, issues, and they don't, they're looking for special services. Who can I tell them to call? So it's even just in everybody's personal life, professional life. Now these cops have a resource, and they'll come to us and they'll say, hey, I have somebody with maybe it's a brain injury or something, and they don't know where to go. And they're on this call and they're stuck because they don't have the resources. Now they have faces from that training, and they can call them. They have phone numbers. They have their business cards. They have their pamphlets that show them what that services offer. So it makes a huge difference in responding to calls. Some of the training since 2015. So far in Dutchess County, we've trained 557 officers. That's 79% of all officers in Dutchess County. We've done 32 dispatchers. They were specifically trained in other things so that when someone calls with a mental health issue or substance abuse, they kind of know what to expect, and they understand when the officer's on the street and he's asking for like a CIT question, they'll understand that when they get that call from the officer also. And 10% of the people brought to the stabilization center are by police officers. So some of the benefits, it's safer engagement for the community members with mental health or addiction issues. Oops, go back. So it's additional safety for the officers when engaging in the community, some reduction in unnecessary arrest or force. It just gives them the opportunity to go somewhere else for help instead of jail or the hospital. Let's see, I talked about that. It increases the community partnership, it reduces liability, and including increased jail diversion. I think that's it for me.
All right. Thank you, Dawn. I think we're going to just have Ken talk about in Dutchess County very quickly the implicit bias work that's going on as well, and then we'll be done. I think we have about 4 minutes on that.
Alrighty.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Alrighty. What's happening in Dutchess County is as part of the collaborative, we got every law enforcement agency and all the elected officials throughout the county to agree to have every police officer trained in implicit bias and procedural justice training. That is a result of obviously the work that the collaborative has done. But more importantly, I believe it's the work that the chiefs of police have committed their resources to get all their officers trained. That being said, that commitment is a tremendous financial commitment, very difficult for some of these smaller agencies to accommodate every single officer being trained. And to help offset some of that cost, the county committed to, I believe it was over $80,000 just to pay for the instructors for that training. And the chiefs have committed that by the end of 2021, every single police officer will have both implicit bias training and procedural justice training. I sat down for that training in September. It was provided by the City of Poughkeepsie Police Department, a lieutenant, and I believe a sergeant presented that training. It was incredibly powerful. Some of the best training I've had in 32 years of law enforcement. Very, very strong, great presenters. And I got to say, it was a useful training for cops in the streets on how to deal with and how to interact with the community. I mean, don't get me wrong. Obviously, there was an emphasis on the racial inequalities out there that might exist, but it was also a great way to have officers understand their position of power and the need for the community to understand why they do what they do, and that what they've been doing necessarily isn't always the best. And I think that a lot of it was eye-opening, especially for some senior officers that were in this particular class that I attended. It was eye-opening for them to sort of get a different perspective. And I think that was incredibly important. I've been doing diversity training for years and years. 22 years I was an instructor, a facilitator for the Anti-Defamation League, doing anti-bias training for law enforcement. I'm a facilitator for the Simon Wiesenthal Museum in New York. I can tell you that this was by far the most specific to law enforcement training that really gets people to understand their own implicit and racial bias issues. And it was powerful. And the good thing is that we're going to be offering that training to every single police officer in Dutchess County. I think that's a step in the right direction. So if I'm trying to look at the screen, there's questions on there. Let's see. I'm not even going to try to tackle these questions. So Steve, if you'd like, we'll get together and try to write answers to anybody that has them. And I will offer my phone number out to everyone out there. And if anyone wants to, by all means, reach out to me. I'd love to answer all your questions individually. It's such a huge, large group. But I think, like I said, procedural justice and implicit bias is the first step in many, many steps that need to be taken by the law enforcement community here in Dutchess County and hopefully all over the country.
Absolutely. Steve, if there's anything else you want to say in the next minute or two, that would be great. And then we'll kind of continue the transition. So thank you guys.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank Ken and Dawn for helping out here today. And I know there's a lot of questions around, what we're doing and how we're doing it. And I'm just going to say it's not easy. It's, you're dealing with human beings, you're dealing with different emotions and different feelings and values all the time. And it's a constant work in progress. So we still have a ways to go. And it sounds good what we're doing, but we have a lot of work to do still, and we admit that.
Very well said, Steve. And Ken, Steve, and Don, I want to thank the three of you very much. This was a fantastic 40 minutes of listening to the work that you're not only doing, but that you want to embark upon in Dutchess County. As both Ken and Steve noted, there are a lot of questions and comments flying around the chat box. We will continue to ask our panelists to do the best job that they can to address some of those questions. If there's also somebody specifically that you want to interact with, feel free to reach out to them and see if you can get some contact information. I am going to try at the end of today, after our next speaker, Carlo Rabinowitz, who will be talking about correct crisis intervention today. I'm getting a lot of private chats about, hey, ask this as a priority question. I've got so many priority questions. There's no way I'm going to be able to ask all of them. So thank you for everything that's coming in. We will try to ask one or two overarching questions of our panelists and the panels themselves as we conclude today. But what I would like to do next, and I see that it's getting pulled up right now, is to introduce our last speaker of the day, Carla Rabinowitz. And Carla, you have approximately 15 minutes from right now, so about 11:50. And please feel free to take it away.
All right, next slide. Can you hear me? Next slide. Okay, great, stop. So CCIT NYC started in 2012. We were led by two organizations, Community Access and a lefty group, the Rights of Imprisoned People with Psychiatric Disabilities, we love. We grew, and then Community Access led it because RIP kind of went out of business. Our goal was to convince a new mayor to train NYPD in de-escalation, known as CIT training. We succeeded in June 2015, and Mayor de Blasio and the NYPD, who we have to give credit to in 2015, started the CIT training. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so after a year of the CIT training, people kept dying in New York City. Now, every region is specific. And in New York City, we just realized more people were dying after the CIT training than before the CIT training. So we knew there was a serious problem. To give you a for instance, in June 2015 to June 2020, 16 people died in police encounters in New York City, 14 of whom were Black or people of color. And we compare that to the years before the training, 2007 to 2014, where only 7 people were killed. So in less time, more people were dead after CIT training. And we said, okay, if people are dying twice as much after CIT training, CIT isn't the answer. Next slide. These are some of the people who died. We talk about the people who died in police encounters, but we don't see the faces. They're all people who are living, who had families, who had lives, and they're now gone. Next slide. So we also as a group, CCIT NYC, understood the racial inequality of it all, right? Because if you're living in a poorer community, of color, you're not going to have as much health care. You're not going to have a city MD on every corner. There may be more crime, so people are more conditioned to call police. Next slide. So after we realized that training of the police was not solving the problem, we decided we needed to get the mayor to create a second task force. In 2000, we did a lot of press conferences. We kept the issue in the media. The media is your best friend if you're in a different region and want to change the world. The politicians all listen to the media. So we did a lot of media, a lot of press conferences. We got some elected officials to help us. And in 2018, we convinced the mayor to create a second task force just looking on crisis prevention and response. That is where people meet the police. Go ahead. Next slide. This is a picture of one of our champions over on the right. His name is Jumaane Williams. He's a public advocate of New York. He's really helped us on police reform. The CEO of Community Access in the middle, Cal Helligan, and a member of our steering committee, Christina Sparrock, is on the left. Next slide. So in 2018, the mayor started his task force on crisis prevention and response. But the outcomes of the mayor's task force wasn't really that helpful. It was a press release. It wasn't a detailed plan. And the recommendations the mayor gave in 2018 were piecemeal, a little bit here, a little bit there, not a system-wide method of addressing the over 200,000, that's 200,000 crisis calls the NYPD receives. There were a few ideas, but for the most part, it was police-based, like co-response, which we don't really support that. It wasn't a system-wide change to address mental health crisis calls. Go ahead. So we decided at CCIT NYC that if we decided about 2016, 2017, and especially in 2018, if the mayor wasn't putting peers together to come up with a solution, that we were going to have our own peer brainstorming. So we put a peer brainstorming together, and the peers in our brainstorming said a few things. Number one, they don't want people to call 911. They want a different number. Number two, they want peers on any advisory committee. And number three, they want peers to be part of the solution to the problem. So we looked at other models of a non-police response, and one of them was Cahoots in Eugene. And if you don't know, Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon sends a crisis counselor and an EMT. What people don't know is that in Eugene, those crisis counselors, 75% of them identify as peers. We put together a proposal to bring like a peer team together. Our team would have a peer who's trained in de-escalation, of course, and an EMT responding to calls. And we define peer really broadly, right? Because we want it to be a community-based approach. So if you live in a community with a lot of violence and you identify as a person with depression, boom, you're a peer. We as a group are against relying on the so-called medical model of mobile crisis teams. We feel that the hospital sends too many people on the mobile crisis teams, that the mobile crisis teams are more medical model, just either getting a person to a hospital or sticking them with medication. Whereas we thought this peer EMT team would go out and connect people to real services, like here's an art program in your neighborhood, here's a food pantry in your neighborhood, here's a clubhouse in your neighborhood. And that's what we want. We don't only want to de-escalate the immediate crisis, we want to prevent people from calling 911 again. We want to get people into recovery through our peer and EMT team. Next slide. So when we finally released our proposal to the press, we got amazing amounts of publicity, just mad media all over the place. And it really influences politicians. Go to the next slide. Next slide. Okay. So I'm gonna not really go into details of proposal. It would be a peer and an EMT. It would be a pilot project. The telephone calls would go to some sort of hotline, and the hotline would be able to call the peer and the EMT who would travel in vans. But what I did want to say here is that media prompted the city to come up with a proposal. I didn't have time to put it on the slide, but the city of New York recently is wants to start a pilot project with EMS and clinicians. Now, we really wanted peers and EMTs, and the difference between EMT and EMS is a city service, and we think they're too closely connected to the police. We wanted private EMTs who would be less likely to call the police. And instead of clinicians, we wanted peers. But we think that there's some wiggle room in that we can convince the people who are doing this pilot with the city's pilot of a clinician EMT to maybe prioritize peers of clinicians, you know, to have social workers who self-identify as peers. So we haven't given up on the city's pilot. We want to make it more of what we want. Go ahead, next slide. So for all those who think a peer pilot can't work, well, I got news for you. It's already working in Queens. It started in December 2017, very tiny, 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 tiny. They have one peer and one clinician just driving in a car. They have their telephone number to the car, and they go to places around Creedmoor Hospital, which is a hospital in Queens. There's a lot of supportive housing areas there and clinics there, and they take urgent calls. And since they started, you know, since about December 2017, I think they made 3,000 contacts. Their response time is 5 minutes. And the police precinct in that area was so happy that there was this mental health team that they didn't have to take these calls, that they started giving out the numbers. So although this team lacks an EMT, it just shows that a peer-led team can work. Next slide. Next, okay, yeah. So if you want to support us, here are the ways you can support us. Sorry, Harvey. You can join us through ccitnyc.org. Our website is going on the prepares, but you can go to the contact page there. Follow us on Twitter, ccitnyc. We're hosting a great mayoral candidates forum in New York City, December 10th. And if you follow us at ccitnyc, you'll find out about that. It's also on our events page. And you can read about our proposal on our proposal page, and you can share it. Thank you very much.
All right. Carla, thank you so much. I really appreciate everything that you had to share here, and we're very fortunate that we get a few minutes for some questions here. So we're going to take advantage of this time, and I want our panelists to know that I am not picking on you in any particular order. Just kind of some of the questions that came in, and want to make sure we're able to address a few. So Mark Giuliano, just so your ears kind of perk up and you're ready to go, I'm going to direct this first question to you. So we heard a little bit from Ken as he discussed some of the implicit bias and procedural justice training will be going on in Dutchess County. Obviously, there's been a very rich discussion today about crisis intervention teams, CIT training, the importance of that response. I think Steve summarized very well that, unfortunately, we've reached a place in the world where we do have a heavy reliance on CIT, and it means that our mental health system is broken. So since we're talking a lot about CIT and the need for behavioral health training for law enforcement officers, how in Westchester County will the issues of racial bias and other biases that play a role be addressed through that training? And I know you and Don Kamen and others are very intimately involved in that process.
Well, I can tell you that within the CIT training, we try to embed it, but CIT training was never intended to address implicit bias. It turns out that many times we end up addressing some of the implicit biases because of the fact that the officers that we have out in the community that are CIT trained, that want to be CIT trained, that are passionate about CIT, they actually tend to respond more often to people of color, because many of our systems on the mental health side of the fence have not necessarily been all that welcoming to people of color in general. We've tried to incorporate it, but I'll also tell you that I've had some conversation with the lieutenant who runs our police training academy, Lieutenant Nick Alonji, who assures me that over the past several years, they've really bolstered up their implicit bias training and provide more implicit bias training than is the minimum standard for police training academies within the state of New York. So it's a separate but related training. And just as a quick aside, when we first started our CIT and police mental health outreach program in the city of White Plains, one of the officers that was involved, who ended up dying during a robbery, he ended up having a massive heart attack. When he passed away, he was a young officer, young white officer, but he was a part of our police mental health outreach team. When he passed away, there was a funeral up in Yorktown. There was a young man who is a person of color who had mental health concerns and co-occurring disorders, who actually walked from Yonkers to Yorktown, which is a good 30 miles, to be there and be present at Detective Mike Perry's funeral, because Rich acknowledged, he said, I wanted to be there because he was one of the good ones. He listened to what I had to say. He was there for me. He was there in my corner. And I wanted to be able to pay my respects. Now, I think that really speaks, it's a testament to Detective Mike Perry, but it's also a testament to the change in policing. When we first began the program, when the police mental health outreach team would end up going to the Open Arms shelter, which is one of our homeless shelters in White Plains, everyone would scatter. Oh my God, the cops are here. That would be the people who lived in the shelter as well as the staff. They would scatter as well. By the time the program was up and running for about a year to 2 years, things turned around and took a turn, and people were actually welcoming. They were happy to see when police came in, and they felt confident and comfortable enough to say, Officer Joe, do you know what happened to me? many of our guys and ladies are tend to be at a higher risk of being victimized out in the community. There are some bad people out in the community, and those bad people, they take advantage of the people that we care about and the people that we advocate for. So to have people feel confident and comfortable enough to reach out to somebody who is a helper within the community and truly feel comfortable enough to say, I was a victim of a crime, can you help me, was a real shift. And unfortunately, many of the men that live in the open arms shelter were people of color because of the inadequate housing, in the unfairness, inequity in being able to access housing within our community. That's who's in our shelters. So I think it's to look at one particular profession and not look further at all of the other systems that create this inequity. We're not going to accomplish what we want to be able to accomplish. We have to look at this more systemically than just providing additional training to police.
Thank you for that response, Mark. I'm going to ask this next question of both of our panels, and we'll start with Dutchess County. So, Steve, I'll let you decide if you want to take the question or delegate it to somebody else, and then Michael, the same for you when it comes to the Westchester panel, okay? We saw in the chat box, if you had a chance to catch from Harvey, the Kowalski Trawick video, and there was also an accompanying article that went along with that, who was shot and killed by NYPD officers in his apartment building. And so you may want to take a look at that if you haven't seen it already. I know that probably virtually everybody on this call today is familiar with what happened in Rochester with Daniel Prude in the Rochester Police Department. And the question for the panel is this, and this is putting you on the spot. Okay, so again, think carefully if you want to answer, if there's someone else that you would like to delegate it to. When you look at least the condensed version, the 10 or 11 minute version of the Daniel Prude video, how, we heard that Daniel was experiencing excited delirium. How would you have responded to someone in Daniel's circumstance, based on not only what you know, but based on what you've heard today? And so, Steve, if you want to take that or delegate it to somebody, we'll go with Dutchess County first.
Yeah, unfortunately, Detective and MLS had to leave on a call. I don't know if Ken wants to take any of this, but what I know of this is that working with excited delirium, and I'm talking from a peer-run organization perspective of what we've experienced, is it's very hard for us to reach that individual when they're in that state of mind. I mean, that's just a really challenging situation, and I don't have an easy answer for that. That is a big question to ask, is how do you address when somebody's in this drug-induced phase of whatever it is they're going through. We've had challenges with that. Maybe others have better answers, but I know that it's been a question of mine as well.
Okay. And is there anything you want to add to Steve's response before we ask Westchester?
I would like to say basically that unfortunately, law enforcement is absolutely ill-equipped to handle those types of calls. I've been on calls like that. It is an incredibly challenging situation. The bottom line is, at the end of the day, the public has an expectation of law enforcement that you can't leave until you fix this. And the officers are very often put in a place where they would love to just be able to walk away and let somebody else handle it, but the public does not permit that to happen. And the institutions that exist don't permit that to happen right now either. So I think that right now we're in a place where we really have to learn how to deal with that differently, because dealing with it the way that we've been dealing with it is going to lead to disaster upon disaster every single time. And it's sad, but it's just, they're ill-equipped. But that's my answer.
Okay, thank you, Steve and Ken. Michael, would you like to take that, or do you want to delegate it to somebody on your panel?
Yeah, I know Mark has had an opportunity to look at it and is sort of our expert, and I'm interested also if Deputy Commissioner Lackert has any thoughts on it. Mark, do you want to start?
Sure. one of the things that I do when I'm not working in adult mental health is I surf. I don't surf very well. I fall most of the time, but I try to surf. The one thing that I recognize when I'm surfing is that waves come in sets. Sometimes they come at you really hard and sometimes they roll by. One of the things that we know about excited delirium is that people don't always operate up here. Eventually they come down. They are likely to ramp back up once again, just like sets of waves come, but there's usually opportunities where the person kind of comes down just a little bit. So it's a matter of just taking time. Now there's a dual-edged sword with this, because when you've got somebody who's experiencing excited delirium, they're at risk of dying because their body temperature, the core body temperature, is rising. So you have to be very strategic and kind of weigh out whether the person is at a point where they're in truly a state of medical crisis, that they're about to go into seizures and they're about to die, or how much time can we use to slow things down to wait till the point where the person is de-escalated just enough that we can bring them, get them into custody and get them to the hospital, get them the help that they need. So it's a really, really delicate balance. I'll also say that there are times in which people who are in a state of excited delirium, unaware of their surroundings, unaware of the officers that are there, can be really combative. And sometimes force will end up being used so that law enforcement can go home at the end of the day, and so that they can subdue the person to get them the care that they need. If it turns out that they have to use electronic control devices, tasers, for example, and if the taser is actually successful in taking that, in knocking that person down, the person has to be cuffed up very quickly, and we also have to have medical care right there. You have to have a bus, you have to have EMS on the scene immediately, because that person is really in a state of medical crisis. It's a very complicated situation that even the best trained officer and the best trained clinician, the best trained peers, and the best trained EMS can end up with a really tragic result.
So I'm gonna echo that and say this is why Mark and I kind of have this kindred spirit with him. So we had a very similar incident here in Mount Vernon not too long ago, and so my officers waited it out. And I think that was not, it was mutual aid, so we had other jurisdictions here. And those other, one or two of the other jurisdictions said, why are you letting this individual like run the show? Like, why are you not taking control of it? And I think that's what the important part was. In our mind, we were trying to find that moment where we could de-escalate the situation and get in to provide this support and not take over from a police standpoint, but sort of allow the conditions in the environment just kind of going with the situation. We were out there for 6 hours. It was a long time. However, the individual was able to get off, get out of their environment safely. We were able to get the individual some water, some hydration to calm them down, get them, clothed, because yes, individuals when they're in that state will get very hot, will take off their clothes, and it looks very different to other people who have not seen that before. And so sort of with my guys and my women, as we're continuing to do this work, it's like you're going to see that. And that is just sort of what happens. The more you get accustomed to seeing stuff, it's not, mental health is a stigma that I think we wear, particularly in communities of color. So people can live with mental illness and refuse to acknowledge what it is. And I've seen, and I've been in other communities of color, non-communities of color, predominantly white, and they own their mental illness. And it is a glaring difference between the type of resources and support that they are able to get in those communities that maybe are not minority, that are perhaps more privileged or maybe just more aware of what's going on. And I think that's really important for us. I mean, we've talked about race a lot today, but really to bring it home in that, because it's such a stigma in the African-American community. Obviously, it's my community. I know it well. I know psychiatrists that have written books around it because it is just something we're really trying to figure out, how can we really penetrate the younger demographic. As we have COVID, I think that is something that is going to become even more of a challenge. We have people that have experienced tremendous loss this year, have not had the resources to deal with the loss that they have received or have they've experienced. And because of that inability or lack of interest or fear of engaging with real resources, even if it's a peer resource. I mean, there's just a very much like a lack of interest and apprehension to even talk to anyone, because it's like, I don't want to tell people my concerns and I don't want this to come back. And definitely being initiated from law enforcement is definitely of concern to people, because there's always, you know, I had to check myself when I first got in this role. I'm responding like a grassroots treatment provider. I'm going over to the DA's office. I'm trying to figure out how to mitigate this charge. Well, that's what the arrest was, but what can we do? Can we figure out if we can get them in a court, or what can we do? We talk with the provider. I got the lawyer on the phone and they're looking at me and it's like, but you're a deputy commissioner of a police department. And I'm talking with family and I'm saying, hey, listen, this. Yes.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but we are past our
Okay.
time, so I need to
Get me talking forever on this.
It's okay.
My info is in the email. You know how to reach me.
Yeah. So I think if there's a lesson that I've learned today, besides the laundry list of questions that I have remaining, is that we could have probably spent 6 hours on this instead of 2. I want to thank everyone that was a part of our panels and our presenters today, for your information, for being responsive to questions, for providing your contact information. Harvey or Jeremy, are there any last wrap-up comments you want to make before we conclude for today?
Well, Travis, first of all, thank you so much. You did a wonderful job. And I want to thank all of our speakers, Michael, Mark, Jennifer, Janice, Ken, Steve, Dawn, and Carla, for your great work and your great work in coming here. You've obviously stimulated all kinds of thinking. And, you know, the video of Mr. Kawasaki, have a look at that today, because that's why we do this. That's what we want to prevent. Please stay in touch with NYAPRS. I sent out around our e-news contact list. You'll see more events. You can email Eileen for the contact information about folks. So again, I want to just thank everybody, and Jeremy, I'll give you the last word about the other regions as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot else to say other than what you just said, Harvey. I just want to say thank you to everyone who was on the panels. Thank you to everyone who attended and was part of the chat. I think there's so much for us to keep talking about. And I know that hopefully there will be in some of the other regions similar forums coming up. I think we've identified Rochester and Long Island as some of the regions that probably will be next, but everyone's invited, and you know, keep your eyes open for that.
Thank you so much, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you all.